You're not stuck. You're between identities. And that difference is the entire problem. When you call it stuck, you try to force momentum. You try to rebuild the identity that's already complete. Every strategy session that goes nowhere. Every framework that doesn't feel alive anymore. Every morning where your internal compass goes quiet when it used to be loud. You see, that's not failure. But if you treat it like it is, you'll spend years trying to escape that exact architecture that's building you, because the exit is through, not around. Now, every book on reinvention, every coach, every conversation about personal transformation, they're always mapping the before and the after. So let me draw this out here. And what nobody's doing is mapping the architecture of the gap, what's in between, not because it's hidden, because most people will mistake this as a breakdown. And the moment that you call this a breakdown here in the in-between stage, you spend everything that you have trying to escape it instead of moving through it. And every high performer that doesn't understand this does the same thing, where they force the old identity back. And that single move is the only thing that actually makes you stuck. Because what nobody's teaching is the architecture of the space between identities, not the transition, the structure underneath it, and the exact system for moving through it deliberately. And I mapped this pattern out across many of the different entrepreneurs and founders and creators that I work with. And what I ultimately found was that they completed one identity. The structure that drove everything they built was done, and they were running their next phase of their life through an operating system that had already served its purpose. And all of this was being generated by an identity that had already reached its ceiling. In the moment, they had a system for locating the phase that they were actually in and moving through it instead of around it. Their internal compass came back online. And what I'm going to show you today is that system. So let's fill out the board here. So the first phase here, this is the detachment. This is where the identity that you built starts to lose its grip, not because it's failing you or it's wrong. It's because it's done its job, it's complete. And most people struggle here because they are losing a part of themselves and they're trying to rebuild this identity that's already been built and is already complete. And then the next phase is the liminal space. And this is super important here because in this phase, you have no clear identity, no clear direction. This is the space between who you are and who you're becoming. And this is where most people try to fix the situation by reverting back to their identity and trying to fix that. Like something's wrong with me, something's going on here, and I need to fix my current self. But what they don't really understand is that they're graduating, they're stepping into a new version of themselves. And this liminal space is just there to serve the ability to reflect, to have analysis of who you're stepping into. And so this is the reintegration. This is where the new identity locks in, where you become a new version of yourself and you're back in yourself again. Your internal compass comes back on because you realize and you understand that you have become a new version of yourself. And now this is your new ceiling. This is the new version of you that you have reached. And this liminal space was just the space in between the old version of you and the new version of you. But in this space here, it's very uncomfortable. You're not really sure about things. You're kind of going back and forth. But then once you realize that you stepped into this new identity and version of yourself, then everything comes back online and you have a brand new higher ceiling. So here's what we're covering today. First thing we're going to cover is this space, the liminal space. We're going to dive deep into what this space actually is, what it means, and what it actually is at the identity level, and why it's necessary for you to go through every time that you're reaching a new version of yourself. Second thing we're going to go over is the aware observer archetype. And this archetype is the perfect one to really illustrate and to understand what this individual does in terms of being here in detachment and going into the liminal space, and why they can rarely ever cross over, because they're trying to fix their current identity to adapt to their new environment. But it always comes back to them reaching the same ceilings because they need to step into this new version of themselves, but they just can't get themselves to take that action, to make that move. And then finally, we're going to go over the stay system. This is 4 steps that allows you to easily navigate the sequence from detachment to going into the liminal space and then stepping into the reintegration of the new version of yourself. Now, before we go into what exactly the liminal space is and how we can go deeper and really deep into that, I want to go over what the aware observer is, because it's important for you to understand and to be able to see this from maybe your perspective and see yourself in the aware observer. So the aware observer is not failing. And I want to start there because the most disorienting part of this archetype isn't the confusion itself. It's that they can't explain why they feel confused in the first place. Because from the outside, everything looks like it's working perfectly fine. The outcome that they wanted arrived. The goal they set months ago achieved. The thing they spent years building towards finally happened. And instead of feeling like they arrived somewhere, they feel like they've lost their footing entirely. The way they thought about problems, the way they structured their days, the way they defined their purpose, none of it lands the same way anymore. So the aware observer tries to force the old structure back. The familiar role, the familiar structure, the familiar identity, the version of themselves that worked for years. But now it feels different. It feels like wearing a suit that no longer fits. And this is where most people misread the moment. They think that the lack of direction means that they're lost, and they think that they're falling apart. But what the aware observer is actually experiencing is not a breakdown, it's the liminal space. You see, it's because the old identity is not strong enough anymore to lead, and the new identity hasn't fully architected yet. So every day inside that gap feels like evidence that something has gone fundamentally wrong. But the truth is, the aware observer is not losing themselves. They're standing between the identity that got them here and the identity that's required to take them there. Okay, so hopefully you've been able to see yourself perhaps a bit in the aware observer archetype, where, you know, they're going through a whole entire space of being in between their current identity and then stepping into a new identity, but there being some friction there, not really understanding what's going on. And so now what I want to talk about is these 3 phases here. So I want to quickly erase this bottom part here to have a little bit more room. So here in the detachment phase, this is where the old identity, this is where it's dissolving. Because you have reached the ceiling here, and now you want to reach the new version of yourself that has a higher ceiling, and you're in this in-between space. So your old patterns stop working. You can essentially think about this detachment phase as everything that got you currently to where you are right now. Okay? This is where you currently are, and you are trying to step into this new identity, and you realize that everything that you have been doing previously isn't working anymore. Maybe you had a vision about living in a certain place, making a certain amount of income, and maybe you've lived there for about 4 or 5 years, and you're like, man, I need to get out of here now. I just don't feel the same anymore. Something's different here. My morning routines, my thinking processes, my strategies, my views, my worldview has completely changed, and I no longer feel comfortable in this old identity, in this current identity, because I see bigger and better things, and I want to make more money. I want to move to a different place. And so that requires you stepping into a new identity, which first has you in this liminal space. And then here in the liminal space, this is the in-between. You have no clear identity. no clear direction. You feel lost. You feel confused. But what it really is reorganization. And the word liminal, from what I understand, it comes from the Latin word of threshold. It means the space from what was to what's next. Because when you're in this space, your old identity has dissolved, but your new one hasn't taken shape yet. You haven't outlined exactly and precisely what this new version of you, this new identity, stands for. How do they live? Where do they live? How much money they make? What kind of perspectives do they have? What type of worldviews do they have, right? All of that. And so for the liminal space, what I want you to ultimately understand here is that you haven't lost your way. You've outgrown your old map. The map that you had that currently got you to where you are now is not the same map that is going to have you step into and reorganize into this new version of yourself. It's a completely different map, completely different location, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, everything. And so with phase 3, this is where your new identity begins to stabilize, where your clarity starts returning, because you have new clarity from this perspective of this new version of yourself. And then your momentum is coming back and rebuilding. And this phase always comes, but you have to be honest and cognizant of the liminal space that you're in. Because I've gone through these myself many times where I reached a certain level and, everything before was great. My worldview, all of that, my location, my place, my income, all of that. And then I stepped into a new perspective, like a new identity version of myself. And I'm like, man, all this stuff that I got me here to where I am now, I don't resonate with it anymore. Like, I don't feel it anymore. And for many times, I would sit there and be like, well, what's going on with me? Something is wrong with me. But then I realized that I'm just going through this natural phase of stepping into a new version of myself where all the previous stuff that got me to where I am now doesn't really matter anymore. Doesn't really get me excited because I'm already at that threshold, at that space. And so now I need something else to get me to another identity version of myself that has a higher ceiling. So very important for you to realize that we're always all going through this process here, these 3 phases, all the times that we're upgrading to new versions of ourselves. However, most of the time, we're just not aware of it, that this liminal space here is very critical and crucial and necessary for us to go through to step into that new version of ourselves. So now what I want to talk about is the regression loop. This is why a lot of people will go here, they'll be in this liminal space, and they'll regress back to their current states, to their current identity, instead of going through this liminal space, absorbing all of this, and then jumping into the reintegration. And here's the most important thing to understand about the liminal space. It's that the discomfort is real, where you experience a lack of clarity, confusion, a feeling like you're losing yourself, you lost your footing, like you don't really just know what's going on. I'm lost. I don't really know what to do. All these things that used to excite me don't get me excited anymore. And I'm just kind of like in limbo. And anytime you're feeling that tension, that uneasiness, your nervous system is going to label that as danger. And when the nervous system reads danger, it does what it's designed to do. It returns to what it knows, because your nervous system is always trying to protect you. It's always trying to stay status quo. And here, is where your current identity is. It's always trying to protect this version of you because it's what it knows. It's what it understands. It's what it's familiar with, right? And then once you step into your new version of yourself and you reach a new ceiling, then your nervous system attaches and connects to this new version of yourself, and that has a new threshold, right? Where, think about things over here where, let's say 5K, you losing a 5K client, or you losing, a few $1,000s in a deal or a client, whatever it may be, okay? The things that you would panic here and freak out when you step into your new version of yourself, let's say, for example, that 3K, that 5K, whatever that problem would be here that you would freak out here, it's like, whatever, it is what it is. I'll move forward and I'll make more money. I'll get new clients, whatever that may be, because the nervous system always is trying to protect who you currently are. And anytime that you're trying to step outside of that, especially here in this liminal space where it's confusing, it's uneasiness, there's tension, it's always going to say, hey, whoa, what are you doing? Let's go back to what we know and let's be comfortable because I want to keep you safe. So here's the loop. So discomfort returns you to old identity. So then you go to your old patterns, and then you get a small amount of relief, okay? So small relief from this tension and this confusion, uneasiness here, okay? Because you're reverting back. So then you reach the same ceilings that you're trying to surpass, and then the discomfort returns, okay? Maybe here, the same ceiling, maybe you're making only 10K a month, and then you're like, man, I know I can make way more than this. Like that version of me that's making 20, 50K a month. That's who I really am. But then that discomfort returns, brings you back to the liminal space. And so then the loop repeats over and over again, okay? You keep going through this and you're stuck in this liminal space. And the thing that I want you to really understand here is that when you hit the old pattern, when you go back to your current identity from being in here, you get relief, yes, but you don't get a resolution because you're just going to keep going in this cycle. And this liminal space is absolutely critical and important for you to go through every time you're reaching and stepping into a new identity. And so for this, I want you to understand that this liminal space is where most people quit. It's also where every real transformation happens. Okay? You need to go through this. You need to be able to go through this liminal space and understand that it's simply, and keep this in mind, just having this awareness and understanding that anytime you're going through this, you're like, oh, okay, I know I'm in this liminal space. I'm feeling this way. I'm feeling confused. I'm feeling tension, uneasiness. It's normal. And then it makes this process that much more easier because you're going to consistently, if you're someone who's, and you're watching this video and you're likely somebody who's an entrepreneur, creator, founder, executive, high achiever. If you're watching this video, you're likely somebody who's always trying to better themselves and become better versions of yourself. And so you're always going to be going through this process throughout your life because you're going to hit ceilings and you want to surpass that and hit a new ceiling, right? You want to go to above and beyond that. You want this previous ceiling to be like, let's say right here, okay, that's your ceiling of where your current identity is. Let's put current. And then your next ceiling is up here. And then now this becomes your foundation that then you build off of. So then you surpass and you go to a higher ceiling. Okay. So this is the process that is really important for you to go through in every type of new identity expansion. So this is the process that you need to go through anytime you have reached a ceiling in your current identity and you're stepping into a new version of yourself. Okay, so now what I want to go through is the stay, liminal stability system. So this is going to be a system that we walk through so that you can understand how to go through this process with efficiency, with an understanding that you need to go through this no matter what, but it's going to be a process for you to go through it so that you don't try to rush this liminal space. So let me go ahead and erase the board here and we'll jump into that system. Okay, so the stay, liminal stability system. And this is an acronym here. And something really important here that I want you to understand is that you don't rush this process. You don't rush the whole entire liminal space. You need to be in there long enough to understand that you are not who you used to be anymore, and that it's okay to feel this way, to feel the confusion, to feel the tension. Like, you need to be in there and fully experience it. But you need to be at the very top, looking down. I like to use this metaphor and analogy that I talk about in my other videos. You want to have $5D perspective, okay? Where you're looking down at the entire system, at everything, okay? So that you're looking down and you're experiencing confusion, uneasiness, tension, maybe a little bit of fear. But when you look down on it and you separate it from yourself and you're like, yeah, you know what? I'm feeling this right now. I'm feeling confused, uneasy. I'm feeling a little bit lost. And you know what? That's perfectly normal, because I'm about to step into a new version of myself. And so that's what you really want to understand here, is that you go through it with intention and you experience all of it like you're supposed to. Because once you accept it, you acknowledge it, it loses power over you. So the first step, S, you want to see what you've outgrown. This is where you're essentially taking inventory and your big picture perspective. You're taking the 5D perspective of looking at everything holistically, like what no longer fits here, whether it be mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, that I have surpassed, you know? So that's really what is important for you to understand and to come to the conclusion of everything that I've outgrown, my morning routine, maybe my diet, maybe my workout habits, my location, my income, all of that, okay? Get clear on what this all looks like. And this is where you want to ask yourself, what role am I still performing that belongs to the version of me that's already complete? Okay. Step number 2, T, tolerate uncertainty. And this is huge. This goes back to the 5D perspective, where you're experiencing all these different feelings and emotions, okay? Confusion, uneasiness, tension, fear. being lost. Be in that state, in those emotions and those feelings. Be in that state with intention. Like, I realize that I'm here. I feel this way. I feel fear. I feel confusion. I feel like I'm lost. You need to be able to be strong enough to understand that you're going to experience this no matter what. But the biggest thing here, I would say from my perspective, is acceptance, acknowledgement, and creating separation. Once you realize that all of this is just natural and you accept it, I'm feeling this way. It sucks. It's unfortunate. It's uneasy. It's okay because I accept it. And it's supposed to feel this way. You acknowledge it. Okay, it is what it is. And when you acknowledge and you accept it, it creates separation. You're not a confused person. You're experiencing confusion because you're supposed to, because you're in a liminal space that's going to then lead you and get you to your next version of yourself. I'll put under here, it's supposed to feel not good. I mean, really, when it comes down to it, it's not supposed to feel good in this liminal space, okay? And again, coming back to the acknowledgement and the acceptance, once you are able to intentionally accept and acknowledge, then you realize that it's just all part of the process. Like, yeah, I'm supposed to feel this way. I'm supposed to not feel good. Okay. And then what? Right? Step number 4, align with new identity. You see, when you're tolerating the uncertainty, you're not being passive, because what you're actually doing is you're practicing the behavior of who you're becoming. You're not waiting for the new identity to arrive before you start acting like it. You need to be acting as if it's already here. And this is super important because that identity needs to first be internalized, accepted, acknowledged, and realized through your thought process and worldview and perspective and narrative, right? The story that you tell yourself, your environment, all of that. And then it manifests itself in the external world, right? Because first, it needs to all be internal. Because ultimately, I'm sure you've heard this, so I don't know if you have, but our external world is a direct reflection of our internal world. And so first, everything needs to happen internally. The identity needs to be chosen, and then it manifests in the external world. You don't wait for a feeling or like, hey, I just crossed into this new identity over here. I went through the liminal phase, and then now, because I have this certain feeling, I'm going to do it. No, it all needs to happen internally first, right? With your worldview, your perspective, your narrative, all of that. And then it gets manifested externally. So ultimately here, you don't wait for the new identity, especially being in that liminal phase, right? You're not waiting for that new identity to arrive. You build it one aligned action at a time. Step number 4, last step. Why? You want to yield to the process. And this is the hardest one here because it goes against everything that most high achievers have been taught, where you stop trying to control the process, the timeline, the whole entire journey itself. And when you yield, that doesn't mean that you stop moving. It means that you stop forcing. And every time you try to force yourself through the liminal phase, okay? Remember right here? Every time you try to force your way through this, you're going to just revert back to yourself over here, to your current one, okay? It needs to be, remember, acceptance, acknowledgement, understanding that it's supposed to feel not good. You don't fight it. You don't try to be like, man, I don't feel good, so then I'm going to go out and fill my time and day with stuff that doesn't give me any benefit. Drinking, partying, gambling, or just going out there and doing stuff that allows you to take your mind off of facing reality. Because then when you come back, you have to face reality anyways, and then you're just going to go back to where you currently started, right? Where you started in the first place. So remember, this whole process is something that you move through with intention. Okay? So you move through the liminal phase with intention and acceptance and acknowledgement for the process. Just think about the seasons, right? Fall, the winter, then you have the spring, then you have the summer. It's a natural progress, and nature has its own way of doing things. It's not going to just happen overnight, right? Just like when you plant a tree or when you plant a seed, it's not going to just immediately grow. It needs to go through the natural process. And this is you going through this natural process here with intention and accepting and acknowledging that you're going to feel uncomfortable, but it's all part of the process. And you're supposed to feel not good, because it's not supposed to be a very pleasant experience, because if it was, then everybody would go through it. But not everybody does. But you do, because you're different and you want to reach new levels and reach those new versions of yourself as much as you can, because we're always growing and evolving, whether we realize it or not. Especially us as entrepreneurs, as people that are high achievers, we're trying to do this deliberately with intention. So I want to ask you something. Where in your life do you feel like nothing is working and you can't explain why? What identity are you still performing that belongs to a version of you that's already complete? What would it look like to stop trying to escape this phase and let it do what it's actually here to do? Because the feeling that you've been calling being stuck is not a sign that you're failing. It's a sign that you've outgrown something, and the version of you that comes next is already forming. You don't need to rush it. You don't need to force it. You just need to keep moving.